Cessation, involuntary cessation and voluntary cessation. What we're going to look at is the word cessation. So cessation refers to when the business actually closes down. And if it is voluntary cessation, it means that it's the owner that has made that decision to close the business. It might be that the owner has lost enthusiasm for the business, the profits might be falling, the cash flow is not good. They might be sick of being a sole trader and not being able to take holidays. It might be that they want to retire. So there could be all sorts of reasons why the owner decides that that's it for the business and they want to close. On the other side of the coin, we have involuntary cessation. And what we mean by that is that the business isn't going all that well. The creditors are not really happy with not getting paid. And so they go to a court and tell the court about that particular problem. And the business is then put into receivership or liquidation. And it's not something that the owner really wanted to do, but it's forced upon them by a court ruling. So that's basically what we mean by cessation, voluntary cessation and involuntary cessation. So it depends on the legal structure of the business as to what type of winding down of the business will occur. So when we are a sole trader or a partner, we might go into bankruptcy. We might also become bankrupt when we're a private company or a public company. But we'll go through first of all the voluntary cessation, and we'll look at how that actually happens, and then we'll talk about the involuntary cessation. So a business may cease operations and voluntarily wind up their affairs. Any assets owned by the business are sold. The business stops operating because the owner might wish to retire, like I said, or maybe a change of lifestyle. Maybe the sole trader has actually died. So the business ceases to trade, and with debts increasing and negative cash flow, as I said, the owner soon has to realise that they have to actually wind up the business. So they could, as we said, they could declare themselves bankrupt and then sell off all their assets. In a private company or public company, we know that there are a lot of other stakeholders involved in the business. There are people that, like, there's more than one or two owners in this sort of business, and so there's a lot more at stake there. They might decide that they want to voluntarily wind down the business. They might put it to a vote of all the shareholders, and the shareholders decide that they want to do that. Or it might be that the business's debts are to a point where the owner is forced to cease trading by the creditors of the business. That is, to undergo involuntary cessation. Creditors are those people, of course, or businesses who are owed money. So even though a business appears to be in financial difficulty, many owners continue operating in the hope that things will get better. In many cases, they don't. As the business continues its decline, creditors become worried about the money they are owed and force the owner into winding up the business. So sole traders, businesses owned and operated by one person, and partnerships, businesses owned and operated by 2 to 20, may end up being declared bankrupt. And bankruptcy is a declaration that a business or person is unable to pay his or her debts. Bankruptcy, as I said, can either be voluntary or involuntary. So if it is involuntary, then somebody will actually apply to a court for a bankruptcy order to be made. It might be the owner if it's voluntary, or it might be somebody else, somebody that is owed money by the business, and they go to a court and they say, right, well, I'm not getting my money. That company need to be bankrupt if they can't pay me. So the court then appoints a representative to collect any money owed to the business, and this money, along with money raised from the sale of any assets of the business, is then divided between the creditors. The process of converting the assets of a business into cash is called realisation. So you could go into voluntary administration, and that occurs when an independent administrator is appointed to operate the business in the hope of trading out of the present financial problems. So you could voluntarily do that. When an administrator is actually put into place, their task is to bring the business and its creditors together and examine the financial affairs of the business. Appointing a voluntary administrator is becoming an increasingly attractive alternative, especially to small business owners. If successful, the business may resume normal trading, and that'd be fantastic. If unsuccessful, the business goes into liquidation. And liquidation occurs when an independent and suitably qualified person, the liquidator, is appointed to take control of the business with the intention of selling all the company's assets in an orderly and fair way in order to pay the creditors. So a company in liquidation can also be in receivership. And receivership is where a business has a receiver appointed by creditors or the courts to take charge of the affairs of the business. Unlike liquidation, though, the business may not necessarily be wound up. The main features of liquidation are that it can be regarded as the equivalent of bankruptcy for a company or a corporation, results in the life of a company coming to an end, normally occurs because the company is unable to pay its debts when they fall due, and when you can't pay your debts, your bills, when they fall due, you're known to become insolvent. There are two types of insolvent liquidation. Creditors' voluntary liquidation. This is the most common type of liquidation process and can come about in one of two ways. The first method involves creditors voting for liquidation following a voluntary administration. The second method involves the company's shareholders agreeing to liquidate the company and appoint a liquidator. The second type of insolvent liquidation is through a court. It's involuntary liquidation. And in this situation, a court appoints a liquidator to wind up the company, usually after an application has been made from either a creditor, a shareholder, a company director, or in some circumstances, the Australian Securities and Investment Commission, or ASIC. When a company is being liquidated because it is insolvent, the liquidator's prime responsibility is to the company creditors. The liquidator's main functions are to take possession of and realise and convert into cash the company's assets, to investigate and report to creditors about the company's financial and related business affairs, determine the debts owed by the company and pay the company's creditors, scrutinise the reasons for the company failure, report possible offences by people involved with the company to ASIC, finally to deregister or dissolve the company. A liquidator is not required to do any work unless there are enough assets to pay their costs. So there's lots of problems for stakeholders due to liquidation. The company directors could lose their directorship position and might be disqualified as a director. They could lose personal assets to pay for the company's debts. There's a possibility of a fine or imprisonment. Creditors might not get their money owed, so that wouldn't be good. Employees lose their jobs. So there's lots of ripple effects when a company does go into liquidation.